Let's see. Biden's been in office 3 days now, and I never really got to say much about his speech and how it went. But when Joe Biden was not necessarily the star of the ceremony that marked his inauguration as the 46th president of the United States of America, but that was probably by design. In an address delivered at the Capitol, an edifice that gained new symbolic importance after the far-right insurrection of January 6th that aired on every major network and cable news channel, as well as on various streaming platforms and social media sites, Biden didn't talk much about himself. His emphasis was on this nation as a collective. When he said we, he was referring to, as he did dozens of times, he meant not just his administration or his party or his voters, but he's referring to all 331 million or so Americans. Although the new president had plenty of reasons to be furious at his predecessor and that leaders enablers had wrought that there was no trace of anger in his speech, in place of the American carnage that was so jarringly invoked in 2017, Biden offered his own inaugural theme, America United. It was as television, at least a little bit dull, like the board flags already filtering out of an inauguration halfway through Biden's speech. The Onion proclaimed, but hey, maybe in an address that had us checking our watches every other minute was the perfect way to shake off the curse of living in interesting times. By the end of Biden's remarks, one sentiment had become so common on Twitter that it almost qualified as a meme. What a relief to be bored by the president, even if you disagreed. Um, um, it says even if you disagreed with this inauguration that MSNBC's Casey Hunt described as being marked by radical normacy, not the quintessential expression of a campaign premised on neither a cult or personality nor a vision of for sweeping systemic change, but on getting America back to normal. Pumpkin Tits squadancy was, after all, defined for those who never brought into the maggot agenda as 4-year battle against the so-called normalization of policies and behaviors that had previously been considered beyond the pale for a U.S. president, and an emphasis on embracing what is normal from the country and rejecting what isn't has long been a preoccupation of the executive branch. It's probably no coincidence that Warren G. Harding popularized the word normalcy, whose semblance gives it a softer sound than normality during the post-World War I election of the election of 1920. When he championed the normal times and a return to normalcy, if only the spectacle of this inauguration programming made of normalcy felt more like an effective or even convincing message to send a nation still threatened by domestic terrorism, struggling amid the mass unemployment and dying of COVID-19 by the hundreds of thousands. In fairness, there was plenty to praise in Biden's presentation of a new American normal liberated from the narcissistic whims of a single reactionary attention-gobbling douchebag. Women and people of color, but particularly women of color, played prominent roles in the ceremony, with Jennifer Lopez and Lady Gaga performing patriotic anthems alongside Garth Brooks, Amy Klobuchar acting as the inauguration's MC, and the president's longtime friend, Reverend Sylvester Beeman of the Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Wilmington, delivering the benediction. Biden spent more time acknowledging the historic nature of Harris's vice presidency than he did taking up his own achievement. By far, the most memorable words of the day came from Amanda Gorman, the 22-year-old poet whose new work, The Hill We Climb, captured the anxious, ambivalent spirit of this transitional moment. Somehow, Gorman declaimed that we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken but simply unfinished. In the days leading up to the inauguration, the Biden-Harris team had live-streamed a series of themed programs that interspersed speeches from politicians, scholars, and activists with appearances and musical performance by an extensive cast of the Democrat-friendly celebrities. And to their credit, the organizers made room for some substance, hosting a celebration of public service tied to Martin Luther King Jr. Day that featured members of the King's family. The COVID memorial service broadcast on Tuesday from the National Mall underscored how very abnormal it was that the Pumpkin Tit administration's pandemic denialism had until then been denied as the catalyst of collective mourning. A performance of Amazing Grace by Michigan nurse Lori Key, in particular, broke through the political pageantry in a moving implication of our grief. Hold on a second. Oh, shit. Oh, man, I love coffee in the morning. Even though it's a little afternoon, so now it's be lunchtime whenever I just had to feel like eating. But But let's get back to this. But the fluffiest, most star-studded spectacle felt equally representative of the Biden's campaign's message to America. Is anything more normal than the Mutual Admiration Society of Democrats and Celebrities, and the good of Sundays? We Are the One concert was downright giddy, with host Keegan Michael Key and Deborah Messa cooing over divas like Cher and Barbara Streisand, as well as younger acts ranging from Dem, Stand By Will I Am, to Fall Out Boy, whose bass player Pete Wentz had a personal connection to Biden. Carole King dispensed the oral Xanax in the form of You Got a Friend, and a performance of America the Beautiful by James Taylor, who strummed his acoustic guitar in what looked to be a log cabin, as well was all American democratic kitsch. The soothing, what they call semi-tedium, persisted in a prime time telecast Wednesday night. If women predominated at the inauguration itself, then the after show set a more paternal, though thankfully not quite paternalistic tone. Staged at the Lincoln Memorial, with Tom Hanks as cinema's avatar for common decency, the Joe Biden of Hollywood hosting the concert featured an opening performance by Bruce Springsteen. The 90-minute festival of normalcy peaked with a video of former Presidents Barack Obama, George W. Bush, and Bill Clinton chanting about the peaceful transfer of power from one party to another, as though every political schism, short of sedition, could be chalked up to small differences of opinion among friends, and they might as well have been soon-to-be divorced parents assuring their children that repugs and Democrats may say some ugly words to each other, but they will always love American democracy. Don't you ever worry about that ever again. But while it's true that we could surely use some gentleness amid so much misery, and rejoicing over a return to politics as usual feels premature at best, and today we celebrate the triumph not of a candidate, but of a cause. The cause of democracy Biden declared in his address, yet all around him, extreme security measures enacted in the wake of the January 6th uprising had closed off much of Washington, D.C., and a majority and a minority city recently under siege by white supremacists, a fence topped with razor wire, which was visible in footage of the inauguration despite the camera's focus on a smattering of masked dignitaries that was surrounded by the Capitol. The military presence was enormous, and yes, Biden acknowledges both the catastrophic death toll of the pandemic and the urgency of the work that awaits him in expediting America's return to pre-COVID normalcy. Yet, even as the new president, vice president, and their many surrogates warned us, vaguely but not repeatedly, sorry, but this year's remote or socially distanced festivities would be a little different, accompanying words like unity and its cousin, community. Healing, celebration, and variations on the phrase "restoring the soul of America suffused dozens of speeches between January 16th and 20th. Now, even if normal were possible at this time, would it be some grand ideal for us to all aspire to? So many fundamental injustices had predated the pumpkin tits, but some, like white supremacy, predated the first president of the United States. Democrats haven't always been on the right side of history either, but it's not just the guys in maggot hats and QAnon t-shirts for Rome back to normal might not sound so enticing, but in a choice that was perhaps symbolic of conversations that the Biden administration isn't ready to have. But the new radicals' much anticipated performance of their 1998 hit "You Get What You Give" as part of Tuesday's virtual parade across America omitted a section containing the lyrics "Health insurance, rip off, line, FDA, big bankers buy-in." But it is crucial for a leader to telegraph empathy and humility, and for a white man in power to understand that the privilege he enjoys constitutes an obligation to the hundreds of millions who have less of it. A president who knows he's not the Messiah should also realize that all-star concerts are not a panacea, and that redemption requires more than a regime change. Before Americans can join hands or bump elbows around some proverbial campfire of unity, we have to do the work of scaling the mountain, and we can't just fetish normalcy. We have to achieve a version of it that feels precisely as comforting in every home as it looks on the TV screen. Yep.